So a few days ago, to mark the end of 2022, Hillel Neuer, the man who heads up United Nations Watch, published a list of the United Nations General Assembly resolutions on all the various countries around the world over the last year. And the list is just absolutely astounding. So I just want to read out the list to you to give you a flavour of the various countries that had resolutions on them. So North Korea, that old lovely place, had 1 resolution. Afghanistan, 1. Venezuela, 0. Myanmar, 1. Lebanon, 0. Pakistan, 0. Hamas, 0. Russia, 6. And I'm sure we can understand why, given what Russia has done over the last year. China, 0. No issues in China. Qatar, 0. Cuba, 0. Syria, 1. Iraq, 0. Iran, surely we're going to get some with Iran, 1. The United States, 1. Israel, 15. I mean, it is just laughable that Israel has had more resolutions against it at the United Nations in 2022 than, frankly, all the others, even when you add them up together. I mean, the prejudice, the bias against the world's only Jewish state could not be more blatant and obvious when you look at that list, and we posted it on our JTV social media if you want to see it for yourself. And it really hones in that great question, which is why? Why does it, I mean, if you want to say, no, Israel isn't really singled out, I mean, just look at that list and tell me that there isn't some kind of prejudice, double standard, obsession with the Jewish state in the United Nations. And the question we have to ask is why? Why does this happen? And it's not just that there's, a double standard when it comes to Israel, but can you think of one other country out there on the planet whose very existence is questioned? And the irony is, actually, Israel is one of the few countries I can think of that actually was founded, conceived on, with the backing of international law. The United Nations voted into the creation of a Jewish state and recognized Israel's founding. Other countries in the past have been drawn up by imperial colonizers or invaders, not in the case of Israel. Land was purchased legally by Jews that went there, and then the creation of the state itself was approved by an international body, the international body that creates international law, the United Nations. So when you look at this obsession with Israel, compared to Iran and China and Russia, for anyone to tell me that the way that Israel is criticized today, even with, of course it's not a perfect country, obviously not. There's real issues that go on in Israel, as there are in every country. But to tell me that the criticism and obsession with the world's only Jewish state has nothing to do with anti-Semitism, it is absurd. And you only need to zoom out and look at the wider scope of history to see that anti-Semitism, obsession with Jews, has appeared in every single generation, to be able to really see how this fits a pattern, how it does make sense when you look at the wider scope of history. And of course, the fact that Israel is the only country in the world whose very existence is brought into question. That is just like it has been the case throughout Jewish history, where anti-Semitism has been pretty unique, pretty rare, in that the prejudice towards Jews has not just been a dislike, but anti-Semitism has been exterminationist. The very existence of the Jewish state is called into question, and throughout history, the very existence of the Jews has been called into question. The Jewish question, the Jewish problem they talk about. So, no, it's not a valid question of, does Israel have a right to exist, that Israel's opponents asked. The question is the question that's been asked throughout history, the allegation that has been made to Jews throughout history, which is that Jews don't seem to have a right to exist. The question is, why is this happening? What's going on here that the Jewish people's very right to exist gets called into question? Israel's right to exist, the Jews' right to exist. Why does this happen? The truth is that actually in Jewish thinking, in Jewish philosophy, there is an answer behind why this happens. Why the world says to Israel and says to the Jew, you don't have a right to exist. Jewish mysticism actually has an answer for why that is the case. The reason why this happens is because of who the Jewish people are and what mission they've been charged with, what role the Jewish people have in world history, which is, since they were given the Torah at Mount Sinai, they were charged with a mission to bring God and God's values and godliness down to earth. And if that's your job, if that's your primary function, to make this world more godly, to bring God's Torah, which are his values, his essence, down to earth, then by nature, you are not going to be a people that is governed by the rules of nature. You're going to be a people that in some ways is going to rise above those laws to manifest the divine, to connect heaven to earth, to show godliness within this world. And so that's why the Jewish people begins in a state of miracle. The first Jewish child is Isaac, and he was born despite having parents that were infertile, that were praying their whole life to have children and unable to. And yet, in her old age, Sarah bore a child. The Talmud even commented in saying that she didn't even have a womb, and yet she produces Isaac. We begin above nature, and therefore our whole story is one where, despite all the odds being against the Jewish people, despite being few in number, scattered all over the world throughout most of our history, and intensely persecuted, the Jewish people still survive. And it's not because of our own unique strength or ability, it's because of the Jewish people's unique mission, which is to show that there is a guiding force, a creator of nature, and a force above nature, and that is God himself. So God manifests through the Jewish people, because heaven and earth, godliness and the physical finite universe don't easily mesh. In some ways they appear to be polar opposites. So what does a people that's trying to bring godliness down to earth, what right do they have to be here on earth? They should be up in heaven. So the Jews, do they have a right to exist here on earth? There's a part of humanity that doesn't want God here, that doesn't want to bring his values down to earth, that wants to be left alone, that wants not to have a meeting of heaven and earth, and says, therefore, if that's who the Jews are, and that's what the Jewish people's role is, stay in heaven. You don't have a right to be here on earth. You don't have a right to exist. There's a part of the human psyche that feels this way. But the role of the Jews, the mission they were given at Mount Sinai, it's a mission that actually all of humanity were given, but the specific role that the Jewish people were given was to lead the way in bringing God and God's mitzvot and his values and himself down to earth, because he desires a relationship with the world, with all human beings. And so the Jewish people have led the way for humanity, but it's been a battle of humanity sometimes kicking and screaming, because it comes with challenges. It means rising above your human nature and reaching to something godly is challenging. Doing what's right and moral or ethical is sometimes more painful than doing the easy option, the option that is more natural within nature, which is just to do whatever suits you and whatever is most comfortable. But it's amazing. There's a man called Hermann Rauschning who initially worked with Hitler, and then he joined the other side and helped the Allies during World War II. But he recorded many conversations with Hitler, and afterwards he said he really believed that anti-Semitism is, quote, the eternal call to Sinai which humanity again and again rebels. In other words, it's that repulsion to the idea of God coming down to earth, which a part of the human psyche doesn't want and doesn't like, and says to the Jews, you don't have a natural right here, because they're really putting that message to God himself. And therefore that's why the Jewish people have had this most strange, bizarre and miraculous history, because their purpose is to say that yes, according to the laws of nature, we may not have a right to still be around, but we're here because we're here to bring this message to earth that God wants to connect to all of us and bring heaven down to earth where heaven and earth meet. And I just want to quote to you a short paragraph from Rabbi Sachs' book, Not in God's Name, which is an absolutely brilliant book, and it talks about confronting religious violence and tries to find ways to resolve some of the religious disputes that might exist between various peoples and faiths. And one of the points he tries to make is that people that are chosen by God, it doesn't mean others are rejected, it just means there's a specific, unique role that we all have. And the unique role for the Jewish people is to lead the way in humanity in bringing God's values down to earth. But what's fascinating is he makes this point about Jewish history, that our survival and our thriving certainly can't be down to our own unique abilities and skills, because by the laws of nature and history and sociology, the Jewish people would still not be here. But he says, quote, intimated here is one of the most striking themes of the Pentateuch, the Torah. God chooses those who cannot do naturally what others take for granted. So he's talking about, the conflicts between Isaac and Ishmael, between Jacob and Esau. He notes that actually, in many ways, Ishmael and Esau were more skillful in being able to certainly handle the physical challenges of this world, and were more able just to go out there and look after themselves, fend for themselves. Esau was described as a man of the field. But when he talks about the Jewish people, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob were all promised the land of Canaan and Israel, but they own none of it, and they have to beg or pay to bury their dead. And there's something a bit sort of humiliating and degrading about this. They have to pitch their own tent or draw water from wells that they themselves have to dig. Moses, the bearer of the divine word, is a man that says of himself, I am not a man of words, I'm slow of speech and of a slow tongue. And he says, and this is so powerful, and this is really the point, that Israel is the people whose achievements are transparently God-given. Transparent. So when you talk about chosen people and God being a people who are trying to bring God down to earth, this isn't to bang our own drum and say how great we are. We recognize this is not down to our own doing. It can't be, because otherwise the Jewish people simply would not be here anymore, given everything they faced. Rabbi Sachs says, what for others is natural, for Israel is the result of divine intervention. Israel must be weak if it is to be strong. For its strength must come from heaven, so that it can never say, my power and the strength of my hands have achieved this well for me. And this explains so much, because the accusation of saying Israel has no right to exist is tapping into that underlying reality that humanity really knows, which is that the Jewish people do not operate according to the laws of nature and the laws of history. And therefore, on some level, if you're not going to exist within the laws of nature, then why do you have a right to exist in this natural world? The natural course would be for earth to be earth and for heaven to be heaven. But the role of the Jewish people has been to bring that message to all of humanity, that God created us because he desires us. And just as in a marriage, men may be from Mars, women may be from Venus, so too, heaven and earth, very, very different. But the idea is there's a romance here. There's a desire to want to have the other and to get married, and for the two to join as one. That has been the role of the Jewish people. And the push against the Jews has been a push against that desire within God, and that desire that's actually there within human beings too, if it's one digs deep enough to find it. So that's really what's going on. It's always important to have that broader context, I think, whenever seeing these things, because one can easily get disheartened, perhaps even become apathetic when they see the obsession with Israel and Jews in a negative sense. But the truth is that Jewish people are optimists because we believe that our golden age for the world is going to be in the future. There is going to be that happy ending where heaven and earth do marry up, where earth becomes heavenly. Unlike other religions, we're not trying to get to heaven, we're trying to bring heaven down to earth, where earth becomes a permanent abode for God, where earth becomes heaven forever. And that's been the role of the Jewish people, to bring heaven down to earth. The role of the nations, the primary function, is to bring earth heavenwards. Anti-Semitism is when people resist that call to bring heaven and earth closer. But the positive role that can be found within the other nations from a Jewish philosophical perspective is to try and bring earth heavenward, which means to make this place better, more comfortable, to make our existence, the quality of our lives in all spheres, from health to technology, education, all different aspects, to make this world more comfortable, to make our existence here as human beings more comfortable. So while there may be some interlapping between the two roles, the primary role of the nations of this world is to bring this earth more heavenward, to improve our existence, our comfort in all different spheres of life. And the primary role of the Jewish people has been to bring God, godliness, God's desire for a relationship with this world, to bring it down to earth. So on the one hand, there's the improving of the world's existence, but on the other hand, there's the improving of the world's life. Because it's all very well having a great existence and having this world be as functional and as comfortable and as wonderful as possible. But why is it here? Without relationships, without the relationship between God and humanity, there's ultimately no point. And that's where the Jewish people's role has been, to help bridge that gap, to connect the two. And while humanity may be kicking and screaming, we're getting closer and closer to that bond that will last forever. I'm Ollie Annersfeld, and you're watching JTV.